Hi, in this quick video I'll be demonstrating how to change the spark plugs on this V8 engine. This is an N62 BMW E65. You will need 8 replacement spark plugs. The recommended spark plugs for this vehicle are the NGK FR7K, which I have used, been very good. And then there's also the Bosch FR7KPP332. Right, the first thing to do is to take this cover off. There are 4 nuts here, size 10. Then there's this plastic cover. It just needs to be pulled out in this direction, almost 45 degrees. Right, there are 2 butterfly clips holding the coils in place. Now, this is what the butterfly clip looks like, and it's got a screw, a E6, which is fastened in the middle there, like that. So all I need to do is take my E6 and unscrew these 2 screws. Now I just need to loosen it a little bit, and then I can actually do the remainder with my fingers. Right, so I'm just unscrewing the remainder with my fingers without the ratchet. Just be careful not to drop the screw in the side of the engine. Now I just need to open the connectors here, so I'll just pull on the back of the coil. There's a little lever here that automatically unseats the plug. So there I can now remove each one of these plugs. Right, the cable tray here is already loose. Somebody who put this back never tightened that cable tray. And now what I can do is remove these coils one by one by pulling on the little hole, putting my finger through the little hole. There you can see I pull out the coil. These coils are interchangeable. It's not necessary to label them. Now number 5 here will require me to remove this power steering fluid reservoir so that I can get some space. Right, this is a size 10. Don't lose the sleeve. Right, so number 7 here at the back. Now to get this out, it's quite tricky. So close the lid once you've pulled it, and then it needs to come out at an angle. I'm bringing it in this angle towards the front of the engine. Right, the final one is number 8. That is the most difficult to get out, and that is the reason why I'm showing this bank. Right, now that I've released it, there's a little nut, a plastic nut, onto the chassis here, and I'm just going to rotate that nut off. Just don't let it drop on the side of the engine. I'm going to show it to you in a second. Right, so this little nut has to come out. A little cap of sorts. So that was just sitting over there. Notice the lid is closed. Now I'm actually gripping the coil on the side of the body and making sure that that lid is closed. If that lid isn't closed, it's very hard to get it out. Right, some quick checks. The first thing I'm looking at is whether there's any oil residue. For example, if you look inside the mouths of each one of these coils, notice it is dry. If you have this problem, well, then you've got a leak. Your valve cover gasket is leaking. Now the next thing is, are all these rubbers still in place? You see this rubber over here? It must be in the correct placement, otherwise when you put it back in, it won't seat properly. For example, if the rubber has moved or turned a bit, it's going to be a problem. So just make sure that is correctly in place. The next thing is, there's like a rubber boot here at the bottom of the coil. Now notice this one has this rubber boot. Look at this one, it doesn't have it. It's still stuck in the engine. So this is a problem, quite annoying. On this car, unfortunately, when I removed the coil on the other bank, you can see the rubber stayed behind. I will have to still remove that rubber. Now, the spark plug uses a number 16. It's advisable that your tool has a rubber washer. What that does is it actually makes it sticky here. It actually holds the spark plug in place when you're removing it. For example, if you look at that, that's what we want to get. Now, to get the spark plugs out, I use a combination of adapters. Notice I have varying lengths of these little extension arms, which you'll see in the video. Right, these 2 tools are very useful. If you have a look at the shape, when that goes in there, you can see that it's rigid. But when this one goes in here, notice how this thing can move. Just have a look at that difference in shape. This is very useful, and also one of these will be very useful. Right, to remove the spark plugs, the ones over here are easier to get to than compared to the last one. Notice I just put my tool in, and it is quite deep in there, so I'm going to just use another extension When unscrewing it, try to support it. You don't want to damage the head. Now, just to give you an idea of the length, that whole part was recessed, and that was the little part that I put in at the end to get the reach. That's basically how long that channel is. Now, you may be able to get the entire extension in, but towards the back, you'll have to do it in 2 parts. Right, so I'm just going to remove these other plugs. Now, notice it's getting a bit too long here, so I'm just pulling out that part of the extension because now it's also got the plug attached. I take that one off, and now I can pull out the other one. Okay, to get into the one at the back, I've got this hinged one here, and I'm going to try and get in there. Notice that because of that bend, it does allow me to get into there easier. Now, there's a gap here, and using a very long extension, I can actually join to that hinged one. Right, so now I just need to unscrew it. Notice as I'm pulling it out, I'm removing one of the extensions to give me space. Right, there we go. Right, so now I just insert these spark plugs one by one. Very important is when you insert it, use your hand and gently twist it in. It should be easy to turn for a while. If you're finding that it's quite difficult immediately, you are cross-threading it. So I'm turning it with very little force. If you're finding there's too much resistance, you're cross-threading. So pull it out or unscrew it and then start again. So the starting turns are the most important. Once you've got that right, it should be easy to install this. Now, the one at the end is the most sensitive to being cross-threaded. When one's turning it, it's quite easy to turn it at an angle and cross-thread it. So that's the one you've got to be most careful with. If you're finding that it comes out of the socket and you can't get the socket out, I just put some tape on it to make it more stiff. Then when I push it in, then when I pull it out, it actually pulls out the whole socket. Sometimes this part gets stuck on the inside there. Right, tightening the spark plug. So I've tightened it up to the point where it offers some resistance. Now, once it offers resistance, I can do half a turn because this plug has 14mm threads. So for a 14mm thread plug, I'm going to be torquing it to about 25 Newton meters. Now, what that does is there's a little washer here. It actually seats that washer to make a gas tight seal. Never over tighten the spark plug. So once it's offered some resistance, I can now do between a quarter and half a turn. I prefer to use a torque wrench. Now I've set the torque value to 25 Newton meters. Now notice I've got some tape here. The reason being is I don't want the socket to get stuck inside there, especially because I'm coming at an angle. If you want to, what you could do is remove the rubber washer at this point so that the socket does not get stuck inside there. Right, now it's time to install the coils. I just use a contact cleaner. I spray a little bit over there and a little bit on the terminal. That just deoxidizes them, but this is not a requirement. Right, so I first connect the connector, and then I push that in, and then I seat the plug. The connectors can only go in one way. The one at the back is also hard to return, so what I do is I put it in the same way I took it out, but I just push on the engine a bit. So I just push the engine a bit to the side, not even 2 millimeters, and that's the clearance I needed to get that final one in. The other thing I did is I also took this cap off. They're quite easy to take off, so I just took it off in order to get a bit more space. So I just need to return this clip now. Now there is this cable tray which needs to be seated as well. It does clip in. Right, so I've put these butterfly wings back on and I've made sure they're seated correctly. There's that plastic nut at the back I've put back on. I've tightened these, I've put this back on, and now I can return this cover. It does help if you put a little bit of grease on these little nipples. There is a wire here at the back which goes over the cover, not under the cover. And then this lines up. There's a line here that actually shows you the alignment from that cover to that cover. Right, now it's time to do bank 1. I'm not going to show bank 1 because it's much easier than bank 2. You just repeat the steps for bank 1. Right, I'll just show you one tip. Now, if you're trying to get this into the number 8 cylinder, and if yours is damaged like this has been taken in and out many times, and what has happened is it's actually damaged. It's supposed to look like that. Now, these raised sections provide a guide for getting this in. So if yours looks like this, it's going to be very hard to get it into the cylinders at the back. So at this point, it might be useful to swap this to number 1 or number 5, and use the ones that are still fresh for the back cylinders.